For anyone who might not know, my name is Andrew Kenady, better known as Nintendrew on YouTube. This is my buddy John. I'm curious to see where we'll. I wonder if we'll butt heads or advice.
We could be. There's probably more in common than we think.
Yeah,
but we honestly haven't even talked about it. So
yeah. No, this
so
is.
We will now. This is gonna be the first time we talk about it. May as well do it in front of a live audience.
Yeah, we might just have a live fight. Like.
Yeah, that's right. I don't know. You might take me out though. We'll see. Got weak knees. So.
Well, yeah. So I've. I guess to set the stage a bit, I'll give a bit of a backstory of my experience in the gaming space. I fell in love with video games from a very early age, and I knew that I wanted to do something in the gaming space. I wasn't sure if that would be, like art or music or writing or programming or all of the above. It ended up being closer to all of the above. But I went to school for computer science because I wanted to start with a programming angle, and I worked for a couple of companies just out of college, just a couple local studios working mostly on mobile games, and then from the second employment opportunity that I had, I was laid off after I want to say it was around 2 years. I started working in this office. There were like 50 people. And then after like 3 different layoffs, I was one of 5 left in the office. And then finally I was the one on the chopping block. And at that time, I had started doing YouTube. I was inspired by folks like John here to start sharing.
No, don't blame me on this. This is
no, but really, like,
right.
you were part of my entertainment sphere, and
That's
like.
Right.
I just loved that passion that the retro gaming community had, so I started talking about it on my own, and had a lot of fun with it. And it started to pick up around the same time that I was laid off, so I was like, well, I guess this is what I'm doing now for a while at least. But then this past couple of years, it kind of came full circle. I went, in my spare time, I picked up an old project. Honestly, for those who don't know, C.A.R.L, the game that I just launched about a month ago, it was the very first version of it that ever existed was from a decade ago. It was. It's been a very long labor of love, off and on throughout the years. I think it's traveled through 3 different engines.
Yep.
And one of my old coworkers and best friend, he approached me in 2020 during the pandemic, and he was just like, this kind of sucks working alone. I want to work on something with somebody again. So I said, what if that was this game that you showed me back in 2014? And I said, yes, let's do it. Like, it's not going to get done if I don't revisit it. So I'll take some help. So that was me and my buddy Matt put out C.A.R.L, and we kind of split most of the. I focused on the main mechanics and the story and art and music, and his big focus was level design. So he was my. That was always my bottleneck, was level design. So Matt helped me out with that. But yeah, why don't you give a little backstory on you and Beavis and.
Yeah, the same. I just grew up with a lifetime passion for video games. How cool would it be to be in your own video game? And that's when I got into hacking video games. I was like, I can't make one. I don't have the coding experience, but I know how to hack video games. So that's when I got into like Nintendo hacking and stuff like that. Take out Mario, put in yourself, call it Super John Brothers or whatever. You can do that, and anybody can do that too. I have a series on my YouTube channel telling you how to do that, and then put it back onto a physical cartridge for the double fun. But again,
ultimate cool factor.
It's great for gifts.
Yeah.
You also can't do that legally, to sell, stuff like that.
Yeah.
So I wanted to get into, and how the game I released was called Yeah Beavis 2, and I'll tell you a brief story why it's called something super stupid. But the idea is, I wanted a game that was a homebrew that I could hack it myself. And that way I could sell it myself and not get in trouble by Nintendo. Before, but it was early at conventions. I didn't have a YouTube channel, no big deal. Now Nintendo kind of knows who I am, and I want to I want to be nice, right?
Yeah.
So I reached out to a company that I knew, and I know before Mega Cat Studios was Mega Cat Studios, which is an independent company. They released a game called Coffee Crisis. They've done Bite the Bullet, a bunch of other games. They're releasing WrestleQuest soon. But I'm friends with those guys. And they released a homebrew I think it was 2016, for one convention that nobody really went to. They only made so many copies. It was sold, it was done, it was for charity, it's done, it doesn't exist anymore, it's not going to be available ever again, never. So I reached out to him saying, I have the ROM for it. Not that I just ripped the ROM on my program or anything, but I have the ROM. like, could I buy the rights to hack that game? Because it was a really fun game. And that's when they said, like, you know what? You've done a lot of good with us, with your YouTube channel. You promote these games that no one else will. We will, in our spare time, just code you a game. Because they do that all the time for fun. They have their projects that are sold and sales and whatever. But for fun, and when they got into video games, this was the fun part for them. They're just going to do this in their spare time for fun. So I was like, well, just code me a game, leave placement markers in there, and I'll replace the graphics or whatever. And that's when I got my friends Chips and Cellos to do the music and all that. And the story of the title of the game came about. They started coding the game. We didn't even know what the game was going to be yet. I just said single screen arcade platformer, 2 players simultaneous, which is important to me because a lot of Nintendo games, 2-player games, are the same graphics. If you change Mario, you also change Luigi. These things happen. Both players in Contra, both players in Battletoads, it's the same graphic. And so 2 different characters I can change. Single screen, whatever, just make it work. Whatever you want to do. I'll be 100% happy with whatever happens. And that's when I started thinking about, wouldn't it be funny? There's a lost media item called Yeah Yeah Beavis 1, which you may or may not have heard about. The lost media part of it is in the back of video game magazines, there was a game called Yeah Yeah Beavis 1. It never came out. No one knows what it was. It was like in a buy, sell, and trade section. Some people think it was a badly translated Famicom game that we never got. Some people think, and the thing that I think makes the most sense, it's just a made-up name for a list for these things. So if another company copy and pasted that list onto their list, they'll know who stole it because that game's a ringer, doesn't exist. And I was like, wouldn't it be funny if we made one, just so there was one? Just so there was like actually a Yeah Yeah Beavis 1, until I started thinking about, well, I still wanted to do that, but a friend of mine at the Video Game History Foundation reminded me of a story where there's another game that was featured in magazines. It was called Bioforce Ape. It was a prototype. It never came out. The prototype was lost. Somebody made a homebrew of Bioforce Ape saying, hey, I found the game. About a year later, they found the actual prototype and it proved the other guy to be a liar. I was just like, I don't want that to happen.
Yeah.
So that's why it's called Yeah Yeah Beavis 2. So it's the sequel to the game that doesn't exist, just in case, who knows, And that's where it came to be. So they did the coding, I did a bunch of the graphics, and it was kind of you learn it's a team effort, because if it's just by yourself, holy moly, I mean, you'd still be working on it,
Oh yeah, I mean, I've gotten about as close to that as I wanted to with working with one other developer, because I will tell you all, just as a baseline, the hardest part of that process, I think, for us, was that we made a decision very early on to make it cross-platform across PC and all current consoles. And for a team as small as 2 people, that was definitely the worst part of the process, because there are, you can imagine just the sheer number of different assets and restrictions that are similar but distinct with all of those different companies and their storefronts. It was definitely a unique challenge to do that. But as far as this panel discussion is concerned, this is the first time I've talked on this topic, and I wanted to. There have been a few different years. My dad is in education, and he's asked me to speak to a local high school and middle school a few years about just breaking into the game industry and like what that entails and what that experience was like for me. And I thought that now that I've actually got something published out there that has my name on it, that it might be fun to adopt that for the convention scene too. So, yeah. I think if we have any questions, we'll open with questions, and I can sort of spin it off into stories based on that, and see what your opinions might be.
No, I was going to say, I think a lot of us went through the same process. Now, you went through it also with PlayStation and Xbox and all that. And I didn't get that far.
Yeah.
Because from what I understand, for Xbox and PlayStation, you're required to have achievements.
Yeah.
Or a trophy system, and we never got that far into.
Yeah.
I don't know how to do that, because again, my game was built for NES, so it's literally the Nintendo game. I had a friend who put it on a Dreamcast disc. Now I have it on Dreamcast. I have another friend of mine who has
super cool
who has published games for the Switch. And I said, how do you do that? Because I know this other company does. I know you can. And my other friend, his name's Christopher. He was just like, he's one of those brilliant. He's silent but brilliant. I was just like, well, how do I put this game on can I put this game on a Switch? He was like, yeah, I think you can. Here, I'll build something this weekend. See what happens. And he literally built from scratch some Nintendo emulator that plays on the Nintendo Switch that also works for Steam. And then he just kind of fine-tuned it, got the speed up to, like 99.9% emulation or something through the Switch. But it was good enough for Nintendo to approve it.
Wow.
So I was just like, all right, I guess we're doing this now. And it worked great for Switch because now he can take other NES ROMs from other homebrew makers and put those on Switch as well too. So that's kind of been our other little side project for a while. So it just started out with I wonder if I can do this, and he was like, I mean, someone else can. I mean, if it's been done before, we'll figure it out.
Yeah.
All right. So it just became another place to put it on, and that's great for me because again, I mean, you come from coding before YouTube and everything.
Yeah.
And I don't. I know how puzzles work, and I can do graphics and stuff like that. And I can, and I have a lot of connections, and I have a lot of hands in different pots, so I can reach out to people and say, it's like you don't have to be a cook to be a baker, if that even makes sense.
Yeah.
If you have a team of people, you can. You don't have to know how to cook. You don't have to know how to bake. You don't have to know how to do anything in the kitchen, but you can make the best sauces better than anyone, and you'll have a very successful career in a chef's kitchen. Yeah. Because you can just be the saucier. I'm the saucier. I don't do the cooking, the baking. I might do the dishes every once in a while. But yeah, you don't have to know how to do everything to make a video game. You're still involved with the team and everything.
You reverse engineered that special sauce.
You just try, and I know you just taste it a couple times. I was like, what is that? Caraway seed. Okay, figure something out anyway. Yeah, but it's been an interesting process, and then you learn how you can lot check. You learn a lot because you actually have to speak to someone at Nintendo who has to play your game. Mm-hmm. Basically all the way through.
Well, and then on PlayStation and Xbox, they have to get all the achievements also. So you have to give them like a step-by-step guide of how to do every single thing in your game to actually get every achievement.
And so to get your game published, you literally have to have someone who proves they can beat it, I guess, or something. And then they find all the bugs, and then you have to explain your work in a way. you have to show your work along the way too, and that became. Like we had some issues even in our NES version that I'm like, it's good enough, it's fine, no one cares. Well, they care. So they're like, how come this isn't happening when this happens? Are you aware of this? Do you know this is happening? It's like, yes, I know it's supposed to. You just kind of say like, oh, no, I did that on purpose. Sure. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. And then and you find bugs later too for yourself that maybe they didn't catch, I don't know. There's always something going on. And it's even... I have a book author friend, Brett Weiss, who said a book it's never finished, it's published. And sometimes you get to a point where it's like, there's nothing else I can do to this. I'll be tinkering with this for life. I have to get it out there.
That was very much my experience with C.A.R.L too. Like especially being a project that I'd worked on for basically a decade, off and on. I definitely have more in the pipeline that I'm excited to get in through content updates, but it definitely is a luxury that we have now of being able to do that because back in the day you put out a cartridge and that's it, and you got to make sure it's solid. So I mean, you still got to make sure it's solid, or else you'll get a terrible reputation. But
Did you have any questions? No, I was going to ask you when another company, you don't have to call out what company, but did you have any? Did you ever want to come back saying like they found something that maybe you didn't catch, or you're just like, oh, that's interesting?
We had. I feel like it was more of an experience of like finding weird restrictions or strange. I guess the little bits that the individual storefronts would get caught up on, like. If you're putting out a game for PlayStation, as an example, like you have to refer to each of the buttons by their their trademark like cross button. This is the name of the button. If you have in-game prompts, it has to be called cross button. Like that, or if you one thing was that you couldn't. We had originally in the in-game arcade. You would it had a big marquee that said press start to exit, and it was just like it was the start button on each of the platforms. But Nintendo had a big issue with that. You said no, it's the plus button. You have to hit plus to exit. And so a lot of them were intuitive in that way, I guess. But it was we didn't have a lot of surprises because we were primarily building it for PC, which is where it's where the games are coded, so it tends to be the primary platform. But we built it with Unity. And Unity has excellent cross-platform support, so it was.
Ours is Unity too. So.
Yeah. So most of the struggles of of actually putting it out cross-platform weren't in the development side, but were in communicating with the different teams that we had. Like honestly, I don't think I'm allowed to say which which group it was, but there was one particular platform that we were trying to put C.A.R.L out on, and I was approved to put it out on this platform in 2016.
Oh.
I had the development kits in hand. I had it working, and between the interim of 2016 and 2020, they shifted a few back-end things. They changed a few login portals, and then it was just restarting the process all over again and playing email tag for 6 months, trying to get somebody to actually send us the form that we needed to do to get onto the portal to get the download that we needed to actually run
tag.
it. Yeah. So that was definitely the one of the biggest hurdles. But I guess we'll like I said, we'll start with some questions if you all have any to start us with. Yeah.
You said you started off with the programming aspect of it when starting off, like going to school and stuff. Yeah. What was the first programming language you worked on?
The first programming language I worked in, well, I guess it depends on your definition, but in the college level, I started in Java. So that was my CS.
You said the magic word. See, one semicolon with Java, it's going to crash everything.
Yeah. That was the CS 100, whatever the introduction computer science course was. We had a little Java interface. But as far as game development, I had dabbled before college on a couple of projects, and what I would describe as my first experience with programming was actually with Game Maker. Just the Game Maker Studio, back in the day, it was. I think it's changed hands a few times, but as far as I understand, it's still a very viable and excellent tool for learning. Just kind of, it gives you the pieces of like if and for statements, but in like sort of puzzle blocks. And I've heard that Scratch is another platform that's similar to that. And I felt that was a really good sort of ramp to onboard me into the programming mindset, I guess. So once I was able to actually start learning a programming language in college, I felt like I had some of the sensibilities of like what those different blocks were for before actually getting into the weeds of it. So I think and now looking at some of my favorite games, like there are still games coming out today that will do gangbusters that are made in Game Maker, which was the first tool I was using, which is kind of cool. Like there's Hyper Light Drifter and Undertale and Hotline Miami. Like these are some big name titles that were made in this suite that I was working in when I was probably 11 or 12 when I was first tooling around with it. So there
you go. Could have been you. It is now, but it took a bit.
Yeah.
So
you had a question as well?
I actually watched one of your videos with my dad earlier, and it was about your game, C.A.R.L.
Yeah.
I mean, I like the trailer to the game. It looks cool. And
but
what's the question?
You mentioned you like Undertale and other types of games, and like they inspired you.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. No, C.A.R.L is definitely a game that wears its inspirations on its sleeve. If any of you have booted up the game, there's like there are a lot of very blatant references that I'm thankful that I haven't gotten any flack for, because some of them are pretty on the nose.
Right. I saw them. Oh yeah.
You walk into the Robo Bar in the dump, and there's like portraits of legally distinct quote from Cave Story and Metaton from Undertale.
Oh sure.
Rob the Robot. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Even just like the underground, like when you're going through the pipe and
then
buried underneath the ground. Yeah. You'll play the game, you'll see it.
Yeah. Some of that was about showing off some of my inspiration, and some of that was also self-referential, because we had in that first intro sequence, what he's talking about is in the first 5 minutes of the game, there's a point where you go through a pipe, and you kind of like you realize how deep the facility is buried under the ground, and it takes way too long to actually get to the surface. And we only make you watch it once, thankfully. But as you go through, you start to see like little crystals and rocks, and then suddenly there's some bones from skeletons that you'll see like trapped in the dirt. And there's a few in there that were just like nods to some of my favorite games. Not even necessarily direct inspirations, but I've got like a Minecraft skeleton in there, and I've got a Portal companion cube that's stuck in the ground. And then there's, if you catch, well, one that a few people in the know have caught is there's a Freddy Fish and Luther from the old Humongous Entertainment point and click games. I've got skeletons of them that I drew just as like I feel like C.A.R.L was definitely directly inspired by a lot of the PC games that I grew up with. I feel like that's probably the biggest single factor that helped me in deciding what I wanted to do with it. So like things like Cave Story and even those old point and click adventures. Like I always wanted to have like I always love the games where there's a core game loop, but there's also just that little hint of character of just fun where you can like find little playthings to mess around with. And like in chapter 2 there's an optional NPC that you can rescue named Bob, the buoyant orb bot. And his sole purpose in the game is once you save him, he comes back into the dump, and you can shoot him and like make him like bounce around the dump. He's just a little physics
little
toy.
beach ball robot thing.
Yeah, so that's where some of that inspiration comes through. But one of them is I've got a skeleton of like, it looks like a caterpillar if you see it in there. So it's like a few different segments, and that is it's a reference to the first game that I had a hand in that was published, which was Battle Pillars, which is still available for Android and iOS. It's just like a 2D tug of war strategy game that is kind of inspired by Battle Cats and some other similar games at the time. But yeah, I definitely didn't shy away from wearing my inspiration on my sleeve.
I actually have a comment about Game Maker. That's it still has the visual programming that you were alluding to, but now it has a powerful C-like language. Okay. So I actually come from a JavaScript background, and I'm really impressed with how it works.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, when I was first playing around with Game Maker, it was definitely used as more of a hobbyist or educational tool, and then I feel like around the time of like Hotline Miami, around just a little bit after. I don't know, when did Hotline Miami come out? I feel like it was like 2011-ish, somewhere around there.
Could be. Yeah.
I feel like that was a turning point for me where for the industry, where it was like Game Maker started to be seen as a viable option for those kind of projects. And I'm honestly, if there's one thing to take away from a discussion like this, I feel like it's that now it is always the best time to make a game. like there has never been a time where you've had more resources, more tools, more expertise, and just the openness of the space is unprecedented at this point. Where a big piece of advice that I used to give the middle and high schoolers that I talked to about the game industry was that when you are trying to work for, like if you're trying to, if you're about to graduate or you're looking to get into the workforce and you're applying to like big name studios, there are two main things they're going to be looking for. They're going to be looking for a degree, of course, but they're also going to be looking for a portfolio. And if you had to choose, if you had to pick either a 4-year college degree or a good game portfolio, I think my experience, at least with being in the games industry, is that portfolio is always going to be more important. So even if you don't have the means to go to college, or if you're, maybe you're going to college to study something else, and you're doing game design in your spare time, the single best piece of advice I can give to anybody wanting to get into the games industry is start as soon as you can, and just follow the passion, like follow what excites you about the process. And there are so many different aspects of game development that pretty much anybody can find their niche and like find a place, whether that's music, writing, art, programming, marketing. Even like things as like there's just like depending on the size of the project and the scope of the project, like you can the sky's the limit as far as the different industries that can be involved in making that special soup. So
that's right. Telling school kids not to go to college, cool. Okay, so I'm cool with that.
So the thing is that, like,
but there are a lot of jobs within. I mean, small. Like we had, on my game, it was like a team of like 4 or 5. And you had what, 2? For the most part. 2.5 maybe. I don't know. But yeah, when you get into those bigger games too, I mean, like people who aren't even into video games, but they're script writers, or, I mean, everyone's an idea person. You hear that a lot too. It's like, oh, you made a game. Here's my idea for a game. It's like, oh, you should make that. It's like, oh, I can't do that. Well,
that's the thing. There is no short of people who have an idea for a game.
Right.
That's another pitfall that I think a lot of people fall into is trying to like you see or you hear of the concept of a game designer, and that's really attractive. Like if you can think of mechanics that you've enjoyed or something that sounds like a novel spin on it or something like that. But then how do you get from that idea or that paper prototype or whatever it might be to something in reality? And I feel like more often than not, those people who find themselves in that design role have come from a place of programming, or even farther back as far as QA testing. I feel like QA testing is also a kind of an underappreciated foot in the door for game development. Where
there are sometimes I didn't appreciate them, so that's true. Talking to those guys and their emails and their like, I don't know. Yeah, no, I hear you.
Well, they're not making bugs, right? They're not.
I mean, no. Well, QA is the job when you say, "Oh, you get paid to play video games." Cool. They don't tell you get paid to play half of a level for 3 months straight. To crash into wall, break everything.
Yeah.
One of the QA reports we got back was, and it wasn't for all platforms. It was just for one, and it was that they didn't ask. They required you to be able to quit game if playing as player 2. Again, I made this as a Nintendo game. You quit game by hitting the power button. I didn't consider it being like a modern console idea, but it's like we can do that. Okay. So one of our games was delayed by a week because we had to make it available for you to quit game if you were playing solely as player 2, which is ridiculous. But again, these things happen that you don't even consider or question until they come up with it. It's like, why would you even think of that? No one's gonna do that. It doesn't matter.
Yeah. Well, did we have any more questions?
You mentioned that your teammate that you worked with for level design.
Yeah.
Can you elaborate a little bit exactly on what that would be?
Sure. Yeah. So my development partner was Matt Bedner. Is his name? He goes under the label of Morningstar Game Studio. Some of you might know him as he was the sole developer of a robot named Fight that came out for Switch and Steam a few years back. And so, as I mentioned, like we had started working together just out of, I was just out of college, working for a local studio. And I mean, just as a quick aside, that's another, he's sort of my real life success story. He went to school for writing. He has a writing degree.
Oh, I didn't know that.
He had no formal training in game development, but he taught himself how to code. He built a game on his own about 15 years ago, and he used that as his stepping stone to reach out to local companies and actually like got his foot in the door. And once you can kind of break that seal, that seems to be like a big first step. But as far as level design in particular is concerned, that was always my personally, like when you're working in game development, you learn to find your strengths. You learn to find the places that you especially are most passionate about, and the places that you can like really spend hours upon weeks upon months and like still enjoy the work. And level design was not one of those things for me because I was more of the idea person role. Like that's how I found myself most of the time. So I would like to come up with new game mechanics, like things like in C.A.R.L. One of the first things that I had designed was the basic move set, the basic actions the character can take. So by the end of the game, it's very different from when you first start, but by the end of the game, you have the ability to, you can double jump, you can dash across long distances, you can do this ground pound mechanic, and you have a sort of charged up rocket jump. And some of those basic mechanics existed back in 2013. Like, I mean, almost a decade ago at this point. Like, that was the very core of what I was building, is making sure that those little, the physics was solid, the physics were solid, and that it felt fun to just move around in the environment. But when it came to building a game that could take 5, 6, 7+ hours to work through and beat, I found myself like, I could design an enemy, I could design, a mechanic, like maybe like a crate that can be broken. But for me personally, my bottleneck was I didn't know how to really wrap all those pieces in a way that was compelling and that made you want to continue to explore. Like it feels like a real, like a location that you can explore and that you want to explore, that you want to like find every secret, find every possible route. And so Matt took the helm for most of the level design for C.A.R.L, whereas I was kind of focused more on the story, the music, the art, and those core mechanics that made the minute to minute like a fun experience. So for Matt, I know that one of his bigger inspirations was at the time he was really excited about a fan level pack for the original Quake. It was I think Arcane Dimensions, I want to say is what it was called. And so that Quake, the levels were in the style of classic Quake. And for those who know, it's built around kind of like a sort of a microcosms of exploration where you'll have an arena set up and you'll have like monster closets where you'll have like a switch that you'll hit, and eventually once you find the switch or find the key to the door, it'll open all these other doors, and now suddenly you have to go through the areas you've gone to before, but now there's more challenge. And that was that really meshed well with what I had envisioned for the final product to look like, because I could on my own I was capable of building what in the games industry you would call a vertical slice, where you can have like maybe a 5-minute gameplay segment that like this is what I want the final game to feel like, but this is just like a little section of that experience. And for Matt's where I was able to lean on his expertise was in taking those basic building blocks and making it feel like you had a virtual world to explore. So that's what we talk about when we talk about level design, and that is something that he is definitely better at than I am.
They were nicely designed, I will say.
Well,
I understand what you're saying too, where you open up the door. Okay, now I know where the door is. I can open it up now. But now because you open up the door, you also open up spike pits and stuff like that too.
Yeah.
So, you're like, that wasn't there before. But it's
well,
there now.
one of the earliest things that a very obscure game that I would be shocked if any of you had played was one of my favorite childhood games was called Speedy Egbert, or I want to say it was a French developer, and I think when it came out in France, it was called Speedy Bloopy. And it was just this like yellow 3D render, like like Donkey Kong Country, like the 3D rendered sprites.
Oh, what they looked like then, sure. Like 20 years ago or whatever.
Yeah. But it was this yellow egg character that would just like tootle about through levels, and you'd have to collect a certain amount of like treasure chests to activate this goal arrow that you could leave. And I always thought that of all the games that I'd played as a kid, Speedy Egbert stuck out to me because it was one of the first games that I played where it was a level-based adventure, but those levels were not linear. Like it wasn't like a Mario game where you have to go from left to right and get as many coins as you can and get to the end goal. Like you could find the end goal. Maybe the end goal was visible from the first screen that you started, but you have to get a certain amount of things before you're allowed to leave. And I liked the idea of having a sort of 2D platformer exploration-based game where the levels themselves are segmented, and you choose to go into the same way you would with a Mario game. You choose to go into level 1-1 or 1-2. But once you enter that space, it almost feels like a sort of a taster of a Metroidvania type experience or something like that, where you've got this environment that you might cycle around a few different times before you actually get what you need to leave. And that was something that we had fun with. So.
It works. Yeah. It's like Metroidvania, but its own little level, and it's not like ridiculous where you have to backtrack for 20 minutes or anything like that. Yeah. It's all encumbered.
I'll give the compliments to the chef.
That's right. Yeah. Well, and A Robot Named Fight is a terrific game too. So.
Oh, yeah. I can say that without being pompous, because I didn't have anything to do with it.
No,
but it is an excellent game.
Yeah, but it would be a great source to go to. It's like, well, I like A Robot Named Fight. It would be let's get that guy who did that game.
Yeah.
So.
The aesthetics are basically the same too. The aesthetics are basically the same.
Oh yeah. The grungy meat aesthetic. Hey, yeah, what's up?
I know you like Undertale, and I'm like, why did he not mention Sans?
You have to play the game and find out.
Hey, we were talking about the Easter eggs there, and that one of those
may be an Easter egg in there.
One of those skeletons that you see on the way up might be a little familiar.
Yeah, I mean, Sans kind of is a skeleton,
Yeah.
so
Yeah, a little on the nose,
Yeah,
or
if-
lack of nose,
yeah.
I guess.
No, no.
We have to
There
see
you go.
Yeah.
it, so they'll see it.
There we go. Perfect.
Nice. Yeah. No, Undertale was definitely a huge inspiration for me, especially just seeing another like. I want to say that like outside of well, so I mentioned that one of my biggest inspirations for C.A.R.L was the PC games that I grew up with, and one of those was it's a little bit of a stretch to say I grew up with it, but I still count it, which is Cave Story. It originally launched in 2004, and Cave Story was, at least at its inception, it was a one-man project, and that was insane to me. As like, I mean, how I would have been 11 when that came out, but when I saw this game that was just rock solid and super fun and had a story that was really fleshed out and had like moments that were emotional and like just the soundtrack that sticks with you for years. I saw this as a kid, and of course at that age I couldn't have envisioned like how a game came from idea to production. Like how does that happen? It seems like magic, but as an adult, I made it my goal to unpack that magic and figure it out. And Cave Story was definitely I would say, as far as an individual game, Cave Story is probably the biggest inspiration on C.A.R.L. Just in the first version of the physics that I built, that what I was describing, like making those core mechanics, was sort of cloning what I enjoyed about Cave Story's physics. And then the reason I mentioned that is that Undertale was another big shift for my mentality as a designer, because suddenly we had another example of this where Undertale was a game that, for the most part, was built by one person. And it was when you have that kind of setup, it tends to I guess it's a double-edged sword, because if you're working with such a small team, 1, 2, 3 people, it definitely limits the scope of what you can handle or what you're capable of, but you can also have a really pure artistic vision of like what you see from the start to finish can happen. And it can, when you get to, you talk about like AAA development, like I mean, there are jokes that we would toss around in the office about just like, I had a friend who worked on the Forza and Tomb Raider and Halo series, and I was just thinking like, man, what I wouldn't give to like code the arm hair on one Halo character, like how cool would that be? But like when you get to these smaller indie studios, I feel like that's where currently, at least, and I would say for the past at least decade, where the soul of the gaming market has sat fixed for me is in that indie space, where you have these people who have grown up with the sensibility of the games that came before them. There's not to say that there's no new ideas under the sun, but like that
Sure.
like there's a lot of learning that the games industry has gone through over the past upwards of 50 years at this point, and it's especially with the tools that are available now to independent developers, it's really cool to see what that can accomplish. Like when you have that kind of pure artistic vision of one or two or three or 4 or 5 people that just laser focus on that goal. So I think with Undertale specifically, I had originally envisioned C.A.R.L as more of like a Mario style platformer. I had a Yoshi's Island style level selection, even, where it was just like a menu where you would choose the levels that you would go into. And when Undertale came out, that's when I was like, no, this game that is close to my heart, that I'm going to put out there, I'm going to like open my heart up to the world and show them what I want in a game. It's got to have a hub world. It's got to have characters that you meet and get familiar with. It's got to have some semblance of like something that as a story that you want to tell other people, like something that can stick with you. So Undertale was definitely a big part of that, and that's where it went from just a pure platformer experience to almost an RPG light or a platformer RPG that it ended up being.
Yeah, that's a good way to look at it. Yeah, I think a lot of indie games have that heart too, which is probably why I play so many indie games, because they are just by fans for fans.
Yeah.
Usually cheaper, right? You find them to $5, $10 or whatever. $20 is almost max for a lot of these indie games. But you talk about the person animating the arm hair on a Halo character. The person who did that probably came from Hollywood. They're not a game designer.
Yeah.
They're recruiting so much from Hollywood now for these video games that it's kind of not as taking away from anything, because they're great games. But it's just after the end of the day, it's just like I can just watch the movie and just and have the same experience. So it's cool to seeing what kind of things you can do artistically, I guess, in a video game. Which is funny with my kids. I have children myself, and they grew up with me playing Nintendo, Xbox, whatever, and so everything was video games. It wasn't retro; it was just video games.
Yeah.
And now it's funny because all the games I play on my Switch or even my Xbox through Steam Pass are these indie games that look like Nintendo games.
Yeah.
So it's just going to come right back around.
Full circle.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. Did we have any other questions?
Just one.
Yeah.
So you had said that you could do graphics. So is that what your background is in, or how did you step into the?
Oh, my background was being a hack. This is really what it is.
Making hacks.
And making hacks. What did I say out loud? I don't know. Remember? No, really, that's where I got my start. Was I just made these Nintendo hacks where I can take Nintendo code and change the graphics, change the colors, change the text, things like that. And I know that's just. I don't come from an artistic background at all. It's just, fortunately, 8-bit graphics, you have to use your imagination anyway. Because you think of Simon Belmont, this buff-looking dude. Simon Belmont's face is 2 pixels. That's it. And then the rest is hair and armor, whatever else he wears. So looking at things like that, a lot of it's 8-bit graphics, use your imagination. But then just the creativity through limitations to come up with whatever you can in that little 8x8 pixel block, and how many can you do without crashing into the hit detection or anything like that. That's literally where I got my start. And then just doing these game hacks, and then it was like I said, yes, I have a game. Yes, it's my game. Yes, I own the rights to this game. It's called Yeah Beavis 2. Mega Cat Studios, or it's not a Mega Cat Studios game, but people who work there did the coding for it, if that makes sense. They did it on their spare time. It's kind of like when you go to Jiffy Lube, and it's like, well, how much does it cost here? Well, Jiffy Lube charges this. Okay, how much do you charge after hours? It's like that. I mean, seriously, the game Mega Cat Studios did 95% of the work.
Just reached out to them, or?
I did. Well, I'm friends with them in the first place, and I can also say so they did that for me, and I'm currently I'm working with them for one of their games coming up, which should hopefully be out next year. We'll see, but and that will be their game. I happen to be in the credits, but there's kind of a working trade, I guess, that we didn't really agree on. They're just like, oh, we'll just do it for you because we love you. Because you've promoted our channel, you promoted our video games and stuff like that on your channel, because no one else, a lot of YouTube channels don't talk about indie games, and I love indie games. So it's my pleasure to talk about them. And that's just where that came about. So yeah, really just, the graphical side of things for Nintendo games, just through it as a hobby. It just started that way, Yeah.
Well, I think that for anybody who has yet to breach into game development, I would say that if you're interested in it, obviously there's got to be some level of passion behind that. There's some vision, and I think the easiest way to get from point A to point B and to see that vision become something real is to get your hands dirty, get as soon as possible. And especially with, I think the single biggest roadblock in my mind would be just kind of a basic knowledge of programming. But there's a lot of tools that make that so much easier now. Like I mentioned, Game Maker was a studio that I used when I was 11 or 12 years old, and granted, I probably messed with that a little earlier than most, but it's still approachable. It's something that you don't have to have a knowledge in coding or a background in programming to understand. And even moving more into the mainstream space of game development, if you look at if you go to the Nintendo eShop and you look at the top 10 games, probably about half of them are built in Unreal Engine, and probably half are built in Unity. And like those
Sounds
are
about right, yeah.
those are the two big engines that studios are really leaning on right now. And Unity in particular, Unity is still what I used for C.A.R.L, and it's what I'm most familiar with, what I'm most comfortable working in. And Unity for individuals is free software, and there is just a treasure trove of information about how to get started on any type of game you can think of. If you want to go make a multiplayer first-person shooter game, you can find a code-based sample project where you can download it and immediately have a working multiplayer first-person shooter. It'll be, like little capsule players in an untextured box, but you can do it, and you can start with that as your baseline. And that sort of thing didn't exist when either of us were growing up, and like it's really cool to see you stand on the shoulders of giants. You've got these for the most part you can C.A.R.L was built on almost exclusively free software. All of the graphics and the visuals or the vast majority of them were built in GIMP, the GNU image manipulation program, which is like a free Photoshop alternative.
Yeah, GIMP, yeah.
The music, I originally started working in an old fake Fama tracker called Musagi, which was this just like a solo dev made a music interface that I played around with to make sort of 8-bit chiptune sounds.
Yeah.
And
you have a piano background, so it works,
Yeah. And it's again that single biggest piece of advice that I would keep going back to for anybody looking to break into the game space is just start anywhere. Make a bunch of terrible games. Like make a bunch of just glitchy, poorly built messes of games, and you'll get a feeling for how that process works. And don't try to make your magnum opus as your first project. That's the pitfall I fell into. Was back in 2012, I was imagining what C.A.R.L ended up becoming. Didn't happen until 2022, because I feel like that's probably one of the bigger pitfalls that new developers fall into is biting off more than you can chew. Even with like something, I chose to go the route of the games that I loved growing up, which was 2D platformers, 8-bit style graphics. Well, it became more 16-bit, but
right.
It on paper, it's one of the more simple ideas that you can imagine. Like, it's. I feel like that's been one of our struggles, honestly, to stand out, is that some of what makes the game special is less apparent up front. It's more like once you kind of get into it and get a feel for what we've tried to accomplish, that you can start to see some of that shine through.
You do, yeah.
But on paper, a pixel platformer. You could search that on the eShop and never get to the bottom of the list.
Right, there's so many,
but even within those like limited, restricted parameters, there is definitely a risk or space to get feature creep is often what we call it, where you just can't stop messing with it, and like I've got so many more ideas that I wanted to fit in this game, but eventually at one point I just said, this is done. Like this is 1.0. Like it's gotta be called at some point. So
right. You can save them for the sequel. You can save them for your next project. You know. You can make a game just on that little beach ball Bob. Who knows? You can get a little side quest game.
Yeah.
So I love it.
All right, let's see how much time we have left. Well, we're coming up on the end of it, but yeah.
Maybe one more question if we have one.
Yeah.
Anyone else? All right.
Any questions?
Oh, he was just scratching his head. All right. One more. Okay, we got last question.
If you had to have all the data that you went through and read, bar college math courses, I'm sure they maybe had some play in your education. What would you say is the cheat sheet or the book that you always grab for coding or any data that helped you along the way that you kept going back to?
Sure. One of the most formative experiences that I had was when I was in high school. My parents were very kind in supporting my dream, in that they paid for me to go for 2 separate years. I ended up going for a 2-week summer workshop at DigiPen in Redmond, Washington. And the kind of funny anecdote that I like to go back to is that in 4 weeks, at DigiPen, I felt like I learned more than I did in 4 years of college. And that experience that I had there was kind of a crash course in, at the time it was C.A.R.L. Programming with XNA, so Microsoft's library of 3D rendering pipeline sort of stuff. But as far as if I were to start from scratch with no resources today, I think what I would most likely turn to would be, given the experience that I've gotten at this point, I would probably point to the very earliest Unity tutorials. One that I think of, or that I recommend a lot, is they have a tutorial for this little mini game they call Rollerball. If you Google Unity Rollerball, you'll find a step-by-step tutorial where it gives you, with no background in coding, no programming knowledge, it takes you from scratch to a little game where you're looking at almost like a like, do you know the old 80s, I don't know if it's a board game, you can't really call it, but a labyrinth, where you tilt the knobs and have this maze. It's similar to that. What it is yeah, basically.
Well, you could do that, yeah.
So they lead you from nothing to building a little arena that's like a little square with a bunch of, I think, rotating cubes that represent power-ups or collectibles or whatever, and a ball that you can roll in this tray and collect things. So that leads you through the steps of understanding, like, okay, there's an actor in the scene, it's got a player script on it that will pull the input commands, so you can say, like, if up is being pressed, I want to add force in this direction on this ball. And it also leads you through things like building a camera that can follow the ball, because I'm not sure if they've changed it since then, but I know the earliest version, there was I love the way that they taught this, because you could, you have this ball that acts as your player character, and in Unity, there's a concept where you can make objects children of other objects, so you basically attach them as a child, and then that means that they are always in the same relative location. But if you do that with your ball that you've programmed with the camera, as soon as you press up to start rolling this camera, or rolling the ball, the camera follows around in orbit with it. and it's immediately you get motion sickness. So like, well, that's not exactly right. So now they lead you through the process of, okay, instead of making it a child of this, we need to calculate the distance, and then every frame that you've moved this ball, find that distance, make sure it's the same direction, and then apply that to the camera so that it's moving along, but it's not rotating in the same way. And I feel like little tidbits like that are really helpful for getting in that mindset of how just the game loop and physics, and especially, like, it's wild to me that that's available now, where you can make, I mean, you can build a 3D game in the course of a weekend.
Yeah, for free.
Yeah,
with no experience, and I mean, and all the Unity, all the forums, all the help groups. I mean, there's a lot of support out there too. For if you just like have a specific thing, there might be someone who's.
If you have an idea that can be made, you can find somebody that can help you.
Probably. Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, Andrew Kenady.
Hey, John Riggs.
There we go.
Thanks for joining me.
Thank you.
You all for coming out and for asking questions, and yeah, for coming out to Music City Multicon. Hope you all have a good time.